The laboratory sat on the edge of the Nevada desert, a sprawling fortress of steel and glass, hidden from prying eyes by endless miles of sand and an arsenal of high-security clearances. Inside, the air thrummed with quiet intensity, punctuated by the occasional hiss of hydraulics or the electric hum of cutting-edge machinery. The project's heart, a vast chamber lined with superconductors and quantum processors, was where the impossible had just been made real. Dr. Elena Rourke stood before the portal, her hands trembling despite her steady voice as she gave final instructions. The shimmering oval hung in mid-air, warping the light around it. It seemed alive, rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. Around her, the rest of the team worked with feverish precision, their faces equal parts awe and trepidation. Dr. Malik Singh, Elena's closest confidant and the team's voice of caution, approached her with a tablet displaying a cascade of rapidly updating data. His expression was grim. "Elena, the energy output is stabilizing, but the readings, something's off. The portal isn't just emitting energy, it's pulling, like it's hungry." Elena barely glanced at him. Her eyes were locked on the phenomenon before her. "We've come too far, Malik. Years of work, endless setbacks, and now we're here. We're not stopping because it feels strange. It's not just strange, it's unknown. The drones we've sent through haven't all come back intact. What if this thing is more dangerous than we thought?" She turned to face him fully, her jaw set. "That's why we're the first ones to go through. Controlled exploration, minimal risk." Her voice softened. "Malik, I know you're worried, but think about what's on the other side. A parallel Earth, another dimension. Do you really want to be the one who said no to this discovery?" Malik hesitated, his resolve faltering under her intensity. Before he could respond, a voice crackled over the intercom. "Dr. Rourke, systems are green across the board. We're ready for a live test." Elena nodded, snapping back into command mode. She turned to the rest of the team. "All right, everyone. This is it. Full biomonitor setup, weapons loaded, and tracking systems operational. We go in, document everything, and come back, quick and clean." The team moved with practiced efficiency, donning their custom-designed exploration suits. The material clung to their bodies like a second skin, reinforced against unknown atmospheres and lined with sensors to relay real-time health data. Each carried a compact, lightweight weapon, just in case, and a data tablet for environmental recording. Elena led the group to the portal's edge. Up close, it was mesmerizing. The surface shimmered with colors that didn't exist in any earthly spectrum, and a low hum resonated deep in their bones. For a moment, the entire room fell silent as they stared into the unknown. With a deep breath, Elena stepped forward. The portal's surface rippled as she passed through, her body momentarily distorted, as though submerged in water. One by one, the others followed. Malik, his hesitation visible in his every step. Kevin Rourke, their brash and brilliant tech specialist. Carly Young, a biologist with an insatiable curiosity. And Jonah Hale, a quiet, enigmatic presence who always seemed to be watching more than contributing. The moment they crossed, the portal shimmered and snapped shut behind them with an audible thunk. The hum ceased, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. Elena turned, her eyes wide as she surveyed their surroundings. They were no longer in the sterile confines of their lab. Before them stretched a forest of impossibly tall trees, their branches writhing like tentacles. The ground beneath their feet was spongy, giving slightly with each step. Overhead, a sickly green sky cast everything in a pall of unnatural light. Kevin broke the silence, his voice tinged with nervous humor. "Well, this isn't exactly Kansas, is it?" Elena ignored him, tapping her wrist-mounted monitor. The readings made no sense. Air composition was similar to Earth's, but something in the atmosphere created a constant, static-like interference. She turned to Carly. "Get a sample of the soil. Let's confirm if it matches the scans from the drones." Carly knelt, scraping a sample into a container. As she sealed it, the ground beneath her hand quivered, as if alive. She yelped and jumped back, but nothing else happened. "Just nerves," she muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. Malik stood apart, staring at the distant horizon. The jagged silhouettes of structures loomed in the distance, buildings, but not quite. They were warped, organic, as though grown rather than built. He turned to Elena. "Are we sure this is Earth's twin? Because it feels more like its nightmare." "Noted," Elena said, her voice clipped. "But we're here to observe, not theorize. Let's move toward the city and get a closer look." As the group began their cautious trek, Elena glanced back at the portal's location, marking it with a beacon. To her relief, the portal's shimmering edge was still visible, but as they moved farther away, something unsettling caught her attention. The edges of the portal seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat. She shook it off. There would be time to analyze later. For now, the team pressed forward into the twisted unknown, unaware of the horrors awaiting them in the shadows. The journey to the city was grueling, every step through the alien forest sinking them deeper into unease. The trees loomed unnaturally high, their branches tangled like gnarled claws. Their bark was riddled with patterns resembling veins, and occasionally the team swore they saw them pulse. Strange sounds echoed, low groans like the forest itself was alive and in pain. The ground beneath their boots squelched with every step, as if unwilling to let them pass. Kevin broke the tense silence. "Does anyone else feel like we're walking through someone's digestive tract?" His attempt at humor fell flat. The others didn't answer, too focused on their surroundings. As they neared the city, the forest began to thin. What awaited them on the outskirts wasn't much of a comfort. The city's skyline rose in stark contrast to anything they had seen before. Familiar yet grotesque, the buildings were distorted versions of their own world's architecture. The structures were impossibly tall, their surfaces slick and glistening as though coated with mucus. They weren't merely standing, they seemed to shift imperceptibly, like living entities breathing in the stagnant air. "This isn't possible," Malik whispered, his analytical mind struggling to rationalize what he was seeing. "These buildings, they're organic. Look at them." Elena stepped closer to what looked like the crumbling remains of a skyscraper. Its walls shimmered with a faint, fleshy texture. She reached out cautiously, brushing the surface with her gloved fingers. The material rippled beneath her touch, as if alive, and she jerked her hand back. "Don't touch anything," she ordered. her voice steadier than she felt. "We have no idea what this place is made of, or if it's dangerous." The team moved cautiously through the city streets. Despite the surreal architecture, the layout was eerily familiar. Sidewalks, intersections, even street signs. They were all there, but subtly wrong. The signs bore symbols that looked almost like language, but shifted and twisted when stared at for too long. Cars, or what remained of them, littered the streets, their bodies warped into strange, unrecognizable shapes. "It's like everything here has been grown," Carly said, her voice hushed with both fascination and fear. "But what could do this?" "Not what," Malik replied, his tone grim. "How? And why?" They rounded a corner, and that's when they saw the figures. At first, it was just one, standing in the middle of the street, facing away from them. It was humanoid, but something about its posture was off. Its back was hunched at an unnatural angle, and its arms hung too low, nearly brushing the ground. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, with faintly glowing veins visible beneath the surface. "Do we say something?" Kevin whispered. Before anyone could answer, the figure turned. Its face was grotesquely human-like, but subtly warped. The eyes were slightly too large, the smile stretched just a bit too wide. It stared at them with an intensity that sent a chill down Elena's spine. Then it began to move, jerky, disjointed steps that became a full sprint. "Back up! Weapons ready!" Elena shouted, raising her own. The team scrambled into defensive positions, their rifles aimed. The creature closed the distance unnervingly fast, but when they opened fire, it crumpled to the ground with a wet, meaty thud. Black ichor oozed from the wounds, thick and alive, writhing like worms. "What the hell is that?" Kevin asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, more figures emerged, dozens of them. They stepped out from behind warped cars, from the shadows of buildings, from nowhere. Each one wore the same grotesque human-like facade, slightly wrong, slightly monstrous. Their movements were erratic, as if they were marionettes being jerked along by invisible strings. "We need to move, now!" Elena barked. The team sprinted down an alley, the creatures close behind. Their howls were guttural, animalistic, and deafening. Kevin fired blindly over his shoulder, the staccato of his rifle mixing with the chaotic echoes of pursuit. "Up here!" Malik shouted, pointing to a fire escape. They scrambled up, the metallic stairs groaning under their weight. From their vantage point on the roof, they could see the horde below, swarming the alley like insects. But even as the creatures clawed at the walls, some of them began to change. Their bodies twisted and elongated, bones cracking audibly as limbs reformed into grotesque shapes. One creature's head split open like a blooming flower, revealing a mass of writhing tendrils that reached for the building's edge. "We're not going to last here!" Carly screamed, her voice on the verge of hysteria. Elena scanned the horizon. To her horror, she saw more figures emerging from the streets, pouring out of buildings, all converging toward their location. There was no end to them. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the creatures stopped. They stood motionless, their twisted forms still and silent, staring up at the team. The only sound was the labored breathing of the scientists. "What are they doing?" Malik whispered. Elena shook her head, her heart pounding. "I don't know, but we're getting out of here. Now." The team began to descend the opposite side of the building, careful not to make noise. As they moved, they noticed the creatures weren't watching them anymore. Instead, their heads were tilted toward the sky, as though listening to something. Or someone. "What are they hearing?" Kevin muttered. "I don't want to find out," Elena said, her voice firm. "We stick to the plan. Find the portal, gather data, and get out of this nightmare." But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Something in this place, something vast and incomprehensible, was aware of them now, and it wasn't going to let them leave easily. The oppressive green sky never dimmed. It was impossible to tell if hours or days had passed since they first entered this place. Fatigue gnawed at the team, their nerves fraying with every step. The once precise movements of trained scientists devolved into sluggish mechanical trudges as they pressed deeper into the alien city. Sleep came in stolen, restless intervals, haunted by strange dreams they refused to share with each other. Elena clutched her data tablet, though its display was erratic, the readings growing more nonsensical by the moment. The air itself seemed to distort their equipment. Temperatures fluctuated without warning. Magnetic fields surged and ebbed, as if the entire environment was alive and breathing. She kept the team moving, but the unease in their eyes was undeniable. Even she felt it, a whisper at the back of her mind, just out of reach, growing louder with every step. It began with Kevin. "I hear it again," he muttered, stopping in the middle of a ruined intersection. His eyes darted to the warped skyline, then to the ground, as if searching for something invisible. "Do you hear it? Like a buzzing, but inside your head?" "No one hears anything, Kevin," Elena snapped, but her sharp tone betrayed her own uncertainty. She'd heard something too, faint but persistent, like a low vibration just beneath her skull. Kevin laughed, a brittle sound that echoed too loudly in the empty streets. No, you're wrong. It's there. It's telling me things. It knows where the portal is." "Pull it together," Malik said, stepping closer. "We're all feeling it. This place is designed to mess with us. But we have to stay focused." Kevin's eyes widened and his face twisted in rage. "You think you're better than me? Smarter. You don't hear it because you're too scared to listen." Before Malik could respond, Kevin stormed off, muttering under his breath. Elena caught his arm. "You're not going anywhere alone. We stick together, no matter what. Understand?" Kevin wrenched his arm free but stayed close, his muttering continuing as they moved. It didn't take long for the others to start unraveling. Carly stopped every few steps, staring at her hands. "There's something wrong with me," she whispered. "Under my skin. It's moving." "There's nothing there," Elena said, forcing her to keep walking. "Number, I can feel it," Carly insisted, her voice rising. "It's crawling. It's—" She stopped suddenly, her face pale. "It's growing. I can feel it growing inside me." "Carly," Elena said, gripping her shoulders, "look at me. You're fine. There's nothing there. This place is just playing tricks on us." But Carly didn't look convinced. Her hands trembled as she clutched her arms, nails digging into her flesh. Malik tried to rally them, his logical mind a desperate anchor in the storm of their fears. "It's the atmosphere, some kind of chemical in the air, or a psychic resonance. It's preying on our thoughts, twisting them against us." "Sure," Kevin said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Keep telling yourself that while it whispers to me about what you're afraid of." Elena shot him a warning look. Enough. As they pressed on, the environment itself seemed to turn against them. Shadows stretched and contorted, mimicking their movements. The buildings loomed closer together, their warped surfaces seeming to shift and bulge, as if watching. Once they heard a deep, resonant groan that echoed through the streets, rattling their bones. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive. Then came the visions. Elena saw her sister standing in the middle of the street. She hadn't seen Anna in years, not since the accident that had taken her life. But there she was, perfectly whole, smiling. "Elena," Anna said softly, "why did you let me die?" Elena froze, her breath catching. She knew it wasn't real, but it didn't matter. The pain of her sister's death tore through her all over again. She took a step forward, her hand outstretched. "Stop!" Malik grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Anna's form shimmered and dissolved into the sickly green haze. "It's not her, it's this place." Elena shook herself, nodding. I know," but her voice cracked, and Malik didn't press her. The visions weren't confined to Elena. Each member of the team wrestled with their own horrors. Carly sobbed, begging someone to stop it from crawling under her skin. Kevin grew quieter, staring at his reflection in a warped window pane, whispering to it as if it would answer. Even Malik, who had held them together for so long, started glancing over his shoulder, muttering about hearing his daughter's laughter. The final blow came when they stumbled upon the river. It cut through the city like a gaping wound, its surface gleaming black and viscous. It didn't flow like water, but writhed, the liquid shifting as though filled with countless tiny organisms. Kevin was the first to approach it. "This is it," he said, dropping to his knees. "This is the answer. It's calling to us." "Kevin, get back," Elena shouted. But he didn't listen. He plunged his hands into the liquid, and immediately his body spasmed. The black substance crawled up his arms, sinking into his skin. Kevin screamed, a sound of both agony and ecstasy. His limbs contorted unnaturally, his bones cracking as his body began to change. His fingers lengthened, becoming thin, boneless tendrils that writhed like the river itself. "Help me!" Kevin shrieked, his voice warping as his jaw unhinged unnaturally wide. His eyes bulged, black veins spreading across his face. Then he stopped, his body going limp, his breathing ragged. The team stood frozen, too horrified to move. Kevin's head turned slowly toward them, his eyes now pure black. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Elena grabbed Malik and Carly. "We're leaving." "Now!" Kevin's distorted body rose, his movements jerky and unnatural. The black ichor dripped from his skin, pooling on the ground, and began to spread toward them. As they ran, the city seemed to come alive. The buildings groaned and shifted, blocking paths, forcing them into tighter and darker alleys. The whispers in their minds grew louder, more insistent, and Kevin's voice echoed behind them, calling their names. It wasn't just the city anymore. It was the world itself, and it wanted them. The remaining three stumbled into the ruins of what looked like a cathedral. Its spires were jagged, piercing the sickly green sky like broken bones. The structure seemed to breathe, the walls expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmical motion. Inside, the air was heavy, charged with a strange static that made their skin crawl. Elena slammed the door shut behind them, though it barely seemed to matter. The creatures outside weren't entirely physical anymore. They moved with unnatural fluidity, their forms shifting between solidity and shadow. Carly collapsed against a column, trembling uncontrollably. Her sleeves were torn, revealing raw, clawed skin where she had tried to scratch herself open. "It's in me," she muttered, rocking back and forth. "I can feel it, crawling, changing me." Malik knelt beside her, his voice soft but firm. "Carly, look at me. You're still here. You're still you. Don't let this place win." But Carly shook her head violently, her eyes wild. No, it's too late. I'm not me anymore. I'm not me." Elena turned away, scanning the cathedral for any sign of refuge or hope. At the far end, behind an altar-like structure, a faint shimmer caught her eye. The portal. It was there, flickering and unstable, but it was open. "We found it," she said, her voice breaking with relief. "The portal. We can get out." Malik stood, following her gaze. "Are you sure it's stable?" "It doesn't matter," Elena snapped. "We're out of time." Behind them, the heavy door groaned, the wood splintering as something massive slammed against it. The shadows outside grew darker, the whispers rising to a deafening roar. Carly screamed, clutching her head, but Elena grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the portal. They were halfway across the cathedral when Elena noticed something. Jonah was standing at the altar, his back to them. His shoulders were unnaturally still, his head tilted at an odd angle, as though he were listening to something only he could hear. "Jonah," Elena called out, hesitating. He turned slowly. His face was wrong. The skin around his mouth was stretched too tight, his eyes glistening with an unnatural black sheen. When he spoke, his voice was both his own and something else, layered, alien, and resonant. "You weren't supposed to find it," he said, his tone almost regretful. "It doesn't want you to leave." Elena's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? Jonah, what are you doing?" He took a step forward, and in that moment, they saw the truth. His veins pulsed with the same black ichor they had seen in Kevin. His hands, once steady and human, had elongated into grotesque, clawed appendages. He wasn't Jonah anymore. Hadn't been for a long time. "It chose me," Jonah said, his voice calm, almost serene. "The world, the hive, it needed someone to bring you here, to make sure you stayed. You were never meant to go back. None of us were." "You're lying," Malik said, his voice shaking with fury. "You betrayed us. I saved you," Jonah interrupted, his voice rising. "Don't you understand? This place isn't death, it's transformation, perfection. You can't run from it. It's already inside you." Elena raised her weapon, her hands trembling. "Get out of the way, Jonah. We're leaving." He smiled, a grotesque twist of his face. "You can't. The portal doesn't lead home. It leads back here. No matter where you go, you'll always come back." Before he could move, Malik lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. The two struggled, Jonah's claws raking across Malik's suit, tearing into the flesh beneath. "Go!" Malik shouted, his voice strained. "Get Carly and go!" Elena hesitated, her heart wrenching, but she knew there was no time. She grabbed Carly, dragging her toward the portal. Carly resisted weakly, her body racked with sobs. Behind them, Malik and Jonah's fight grew more violent, Jonah's inhuman strength overpowering his friend. As they reached the portal, Elena turned back one last time. Malik looked up, blood streaming from a gash on his face. His eyes met hers, and in that moment he smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Close it," he said softly. "Don't let it follow you." Jonah roared, his voice reverberating through the cathedral. Elena didn't wait. She pulled Carly through the shimmering surface of the portal, the world twisting and bending around them as they were hurled back into the lab. The sensation of solid ground beneath her feet was almost overwhelming. The lab was empty, the equipment dusty and dormant, as though abandoned for years. Carly collapsed beside her, her breathing shallow and erratic. Elena staggered to her feet, turning to look at the portal. It was still open, its edges flickering wildly. Through it, she could see the cathedral and the writhing, shadowy figures of the creatures beyond. Jonah's face appeared, distorted and monstrous, his black eyes fixed on her. "You can't escape," his voice echoed, though he didn't move. "You're part of it now." Elena reached for the controls, her hands shaking. She hesitated, the weight of everything crashing down on her. If she closed the portal, she might trap something of that world in her own. If she left it open, it would only grow stronger. "Elena," Carly whispered, her voice weak but resolute. "Do it. Close it." With a deep breath, Elena slammed her hand down on the emergency override. The portal shuddered violently, the shimmering surface collapsing inward with a deafening roar. Jonah's face twisted in fury as the rift sealed, leaving only silence behind. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Carly began to sob, her shoulders shaking. Elena didn't comfort her. She couldn't. Something was wrong. The lab felt different. Office. The air was heavier, the shadows deeper. She turned to a nearby monitor, her stomach dropping as she saw the data scrolling across the screen. The readings were impossible. The portal was gone, but the interference remained. Then she saw it, a faint black stain on the floor where the portal had been. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. "Elena?" Carly's voice was barely a whisper. Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. She reached for the radio, her hand trembling, but stopped. Who would she call? Who would believe them? The stain pulsed again, larger this time. Elena realized with dawning horror that closing the portal hadn't ended anything. It had only begun. And somewhere, deep in the recesses of her mind, she heard the whispers again.